Have you ever wondered how we can have our parents communicate better with our kids? What does the role of grandparents in general when it comes to parenting? Or are there certain situations where sometimes you just might feel like, oh my God, my parents can't find out about this on how their grandkids are being treated? Well, if that's something that is of any interest or resonates with you in any way, this next awesome podcast is going to be for you. I just had an awesome conversation with Amber, who is a communication expert based out of Chicago, Illinois. In this conversation, we talk about the concepts of tradition, communicating, bridging the gap. There are so many awesome little tidbits and a wealth of knowledge for all of us parents and how we have to make sure that our kids get the opportunities to have with their grandparents the same way we had with our grandparents. If this topic is of interest to you, please like and subscribe below. And as always, please reach out with any questions, concerns, or comments that you might have for future episodes. I am your host, Chananya Abraham, and I look forward to hearing what you have to say. So, Amber, there are so many different things that we can talk about, but I think this specific point on grandparents and communication with grandparents and the role that they play both in the lives of their kids, how they're acting and dealing with things, but yet also their grandkids, because now
Mhm.
they have a common enemy in a certain way. I'm curious, when it comes to the parents and the roles that they play, and when you have parents or their parents over, so now you have grandparents involved, what would be some of the things that parents should be aware of and parents can make sure that they are on top of when it comes to the grandparents now being involved and in the home with
Mhm.
communication with their kids?
Yeah. First of all, it's an amazing thing if you get to raise your kids with multiple generations around them. There's so much to learn from our grandparents. There's so much legacy that they've created for us. And it also comes with challenges. My own grandma, whom I'm very close to, is 94 right now.
Mm. Wow.
And she got married when she was 19 years old and had my mom, a year after that. And so I have a teenager like you. My teenager until recently was dating someone, and my grandma continually asks, "Are you serious?" Because, at her age, when she was 17 or 18 and dating, it really meant you might put a ring on it sometime soon. And that is, of course, nowhere. I mean, that's a decade, maybe 2 decades out for my children. And so one of the unique things about communicating across multiple generations is that we bring our existence, who we are in our current context and how we were raised, and our identity as a woman who grew up in the 40s, in my grandma's case. She brings it into conversations with my very modern teenagers. And it creates, this discomfort. It creates this, a challenge, and this is true not just with teenagers. I think it starts earlier. You know, it starts when our children are very little, when they're toddlers, then we don't expect our kids to have conversations with our grandparents, but as soon as they enter school, we expect it to be a dialogue-based relationship instead of a play-based relationship. And we start seeing these discrepancies, and it's difficult to find a topic we can land on as a family to discuss. And then it becomes difficult to be known by your grandparent or to know your grandparent. And then we don't get those tight familial bonds that we really want, because it's good for society and it's good for families and it's just good for the heart as well.
Yeah, for sure. And I think so there are a lot of different things to I want to, really unpack on what you were saying. The first question that I have, just, to sort of see how we can work with it, is that I think sometimes grandparents and their own child, the new parent that we're
Mhm.
dealing with and we're talking about here, they have their own dynamic. And now there's another generation involved. And there's a certain like, well, I don't want you talking to my child about that because I know the way you dealt
Mm.
with me with that specific topic. Let's use what you're talking about regarding dating, right?
Mhm.
So, however your mom dealt with you when it came to dating
Mhm.
and how she was dealing with things, now you have your grandmother on top of it. Now she's coming into the house, so you have that intergenerational, which is absolutely
Yeah,
beautiful, and I think there's so much value that can come with that. But yet,
totally.
there's also this generational gap when it comes to
Mhm.
having certain conversations. And I'm curious, what can parents, the mediator in a certain way, when it
Yeah.
comes to dealing with things, what's our role and how can we make sure that that communication, what was it they used? You said the dialogue, right?
Mhm.
That being something that could be really and is very important in that relationship, especially with a teenager, with changes from that
Mhm.
play. What's our role as parents and how can we make sure that things continue to flow in that dialogue.
Yeah. I think the first thing we can do is understand that our kids are not gonna figure it out on their own. The world revolves around them. I mean, we know this just, social development theory for children. It's hard for them to understand that the world does not revolve around them, and even as teenagers have a clear sense of reality, the sense that the world is about them is still there, and so they expect the grandparent to adapt to them. And one of the things we can do, especially with kids as they start reaching 10, 11, 12, where they can understand some of these dynamics, is to just say, "Hey, we're going over to grandma's house today. You know she wants to know you. She loves you and cares about you. She's likely to do that in a way that doesn't feel natural to you. She doesn't know what to ask. She doesn't know what to say. And I just want to remind you when she asks something or says something that doesn't feel quite right, it comes from a place of her really caring about you, of her really wanting to know." So the first thing we can do is have that conversation with our kids where they're just prepared for it. And then we can start helping them figure out, how do I be a good communicator? How do I uphold my end of the dialogue with my grandma, with my grandpa, with my aunt or uncle? And this is also true for, my dearest friends want to know my kids. And so it's not just true of our relatives, it's also true of the adults we want to be the community around our children.
For sure, for sure, and I think something that you're bringing up is something that we've talked about a lot, and in my private
Mhm.
practice, we talk about this a lot as well, is teaching our kids the concept of curiosity, like, where are they coming from, and
Yes.
understanding that, and I think that's, like, really, really important, and there's a like we were saying before, there's a certain value that comes about
Mhm.
from that intergenerational, from those people that grew up in 40s, 50s, and even later than that as
Mhm.
our parents. So you have, you're dealing with two generational things that you have to be a mediator for now. And, I think there's so much value in that. But then there's also the part of realizing that they can bring something into the relationship as well. And having our kids realize that, hey, there's something there. It's different. It's very unique.
Mhm.
You're not going to grow up with that in your house because your parent grew up in the 70s and 80s or 90s,
Mhm.
and now you want to be in a place where you're taking in things from something even before that. So
Mhm.
understand where they're coming from. That they're asking something. Are you serious? And it's
Mhm.
coming from a really good place. It's not coming from a
Yeah.
place of like, is this a real thing or is this something that is just a summer fling? And
Yeah.
and creating that sense within the child, I think is really really
Mhm.
important, can really, really help them communicate. And that's something they can use when it comes to whatever other places they're going to be in life, whether it's going to be college or future relationships or a job in some
Mhm.
sort. And I think that's really important for a child to be able to learn. And it's our job as parents to teach it to them and
Yeah.
and to get them to do that. And we're talking about teenagers here. And I love that you're talking about the concept of start doing this at 10, 11 years old. Some might
Yeah.
even say even earlier than that,
Even
because
earlier.
there's
Yeah.
there's so much to be said regarding how to be teaching our kids these things. And when we teach them this concept, like you're saying, of asking questions and being curious, and she might be
Mhm.
saying something and she might mean something else. Okay, so meaning
Mhm.
the way people talk and their dialogue is going to be different. Yes,
Mhm.
because we're all different, and the world
Yeah.
may revolve around you in a certain way, but there's a lot more to it. And when we show them that, and we teach it to them so that they can step outside and take off those blinders, it's our job as
Mhm.
parents to be going and doing that. At the same time, as this is happening, a lot of times we're gonna mess up as parents. And a lot of times there's gonna be
No.
situations where, like, we know that, I should have done that a little bit differently. And when you're
Mhm.
having a family get together, you're having one of those intergenerational
Mhm.
meals and a lot of people around, and we might mess up. I'm curious,
Mhm.
how can we use that as a really valuable teaching lesson for our kids? And what would be a way for us to communicate that we messed up with our kids?
Yeah. We do a lot of car conversations on the way home where, often my husband, who's a fabulous communicator, will say something like, "So any observations about the week or about the holidays we just spent together or about that dinner with grandma?" And I will try to model and share some observation. "I noticed that Aunt so and so is kind of feeling this way." And then we ask the kids, "What did you notice?" Um, and I think that practice of noticing is really important. But the habit of doing that as sort of debriefing an experience as
Mm,
a family then gives you this opportunity to say, one thing I noticed is that when my mom asked me this question, I immediately felt my temperature rise and I responded before I took a breath. And if I had it to do over, I would say it this way instead of that way. What did you see? And I love being able to do that with my kids because I like teaching them that process. I like showing them that I make mistakes, and I like showing them too that I make mistakes, but I also assume my mom still loves me. Just like I know they might say something snarky to me tomorrow, and I am still gonna love them whether or not they come back and say, "I probably could have said that."
Yeah, I think that's it's so spot on, and I think what you're talking about, again, something that we talk about a lot, and I know something as and I need to work on a lot more is that we are fallible human beings, and
Mhm.
we're gonna mess up, and I think if we're able to give
Yes.
that lesson over to our kids at a very young age, it teaches them that, "Oh, wait, there's a pedestal that maybe mom and dad are, or maybe grandma and
Yeah.
grandpa are on, and the pedestal doesn't mean that you're perfect. Pedestal means that
Yes.
there may be a level of where people are, and they also make mistakes. I
Mhm.
think that's something that can be really, really important to be able to be give over, and realizing that there's a different way to communicate. There's a different language that may be used from generations ago that may not be
Mhm.
used today, and that's
Mhm.
okay. There's nothing wrong with that. When we talk about being able our kids to be able to use that type of language. So it may be easier for us because as adults, hopefully a little more mature, we might be
Mhm.
able to be in a place to be like, yeah, you know what? The way mom talked to me, the way my mom talked to me, yeah, that wasn't something that I reacted a little bit too fast.
Mhm.
And I think something else that you're talking about is having this organic conversation. But sometimes that organic conversation doesn't go so well. And our
Mhm.
kids are pros at one word answers.
Oh my
um, eh,
goodness.
I'm curious, what would you say to how to be able to harbor more talk and more
Yeah.
organic conversation?
Yeah. Well, there's work you can do up front, and then there's work you can do in the moment when it's happening. So, up front, I like to teach people to use handles in how you answer a question. A handle is something you grab onto, right? So, if you ask me, or I'm a kid and you ask me, "How do you like school?" A handled based response would be to try to include 2 or 3 things that you could grab onto as the next step in the conversation. So it might be something like, "I like school well enough, but my favorite part is recess because I really my friends and I have been playing this game out on the playground, and it's so much fun." But beyond that, what I also like is math because I like having clear answers, and
Mm,
math is really fun for me. So that's both a thorough answer, but you've also given the person who asked the question 2 handles. They can ask, "What's the game you've been playing at recess?" Or they can ask, "Tell me what you're learning at math. What do you like about clear answers? Are there other subjects where you feel like things are less clear, or what excites you because of that?" And that's giving a handle-based response. And so we can teach our kids to answer questions that way and practice at the dinner table, at night, practice when you're driving in the car, name the handles. "Oh, that was really good. I saw you gave 4 handles that somebody could grab onto in that conversation."
mm.
So that's the first thing. And then you get into those moments and you're watching a conversation between grandpa and the kids go south. As a mom, my first instinct is to jump in with like, "Hey, why don't you tell grandpa about the theater performance you have coming up?" And that sometimes works. But here's the challenge of it. It only works as long as they respond with handles and as the grandparent or the other parent, the other adult involved picks up on those handles.
Mm.
And that's where you can also prep your parents a little, prep your aunts and uncles a little like, "Hey, ask Sam about this. And if they don't tell you, then say, Mom mentioned such and such." And give them some handles that they could ask about specifically that the kids would like to talk about.
Yeah, I love that because I think there's a lot of prep that's needed in most conversations. Whether it's
Mhm.
you and I having conversation and just thinking of certain things that I want to talk about, which hopefully we get a chance to get a chance to talk at least about half of them because I do have a lot of things to talk about when it comes to this or anything, any conversation. As a therapist, I
Mhm.
think we always want to make sure that we're on the right path doing things, and as a parent, that's
Mhm.
something that's always going to be there as
Mhm.
well. At the same time, there's also when it comes to grandparents, because they know how to lecture very, very well. They've
Mm.
been doing it for a very long time. There's
Mhm.
a let's call it overstepping boundaries that can really
Mhm.
come into play a lot. And I'm curious, our
Mhm.
role as parents, how do we
Mhm.
make sure that the boundaries are set, Obviously, we don't want too much concrete there because I think when it comes
Mhm.
to relationships within parents and grandparents and kids, there should be a little bit of leeway. But
Mhm.
what's that balance? And how do we make sure that there are things happening in a way that it's respectful, but yet there's leeway when it comes to those boundaries?
Can you just answer this question? Because I would love to hear. I mean, I think that this is so hard, and I do think we talked a little earlier about naming the dynamic. I do think that we can build our ability to do that with our own parents, where we say, "Hey, mom, I know you and I have different views on what's appropriate clothing for young women to wear.
Mm, good topic.
I'm going" right? I mean, I might have just pulled that one from my own experience. Um, I'm just gonna remind you that you don't have to mention to Magdalene or mention to Sarah or mention to Hannah every time she shows up in something you don't approve. You've expressed your opinion, and our family has a different set of rules, and we don't need to dig into it anymore. I'm
Right.
asking my child to live by my rules. That's hard. I'm not gonna say that it's easy, and I'm not gonna say you're gonna get a great response from your parent because especially around areas that feel like moral obligations to parents, it's hard to turn off the sense that we have the right to shape our child's moral identity. Um, and we it's also hard to turn off the desire to want your child to reflect you in the world.
Right.
And I think my mom at 74 feels that just as intensely as I do at 49 for my teenagers. You know, we want our kids to be a representation of ourselves in the world. And that is an unfair expectation because they were born to be them and not born to be me. So the clearer we can draw boundaries, set expectations with your own children, and then ask your parents, name the dynamic and ask your parents to hold the boundaries that you've set, not the boundaries that they want after they've
Oh,
had
I
a
love
chance
that.
to express them.
Yeah. It's so well said. I think the concept of boundaries is always important, and
Oh my
the
goodness.
boundaries that I might have with me and my kids are gonna be different than my parents had with me.
Mhm.
And that's okay. You know,
Mhm.
I talk a lot about the concept of we have to respect in a certain way, but respect doesn't mean that I agree with.
Mhm.
And I think that works both ways, as us to the generation before us and generation before
Mhm.
us to us as well. And if we're doing things a certain way, call me aside privately and say, "Hey,
Mhm.
I'm worried about this." But to call out my kid in front of
Yes.
me, in front of everyone, it's not gonna help the situation at all. And okay,
Privacy is so important.
I
Yeah.
also agree that that dress might not be something that I'd be comfortable, because if I saw a girl and I was trying to go on a date with her, I'd be uncomfortable if that's what she was wearing. But
Mhm.
same time, she's 16 years old and she's gonna do certain things that I may
Mhm.
not agree with, but it's also her life. And to your point that you
Yes.
were saying before, and I think it's something that I'm still working on. I probably will be for a while. Of just because I have a child doesn't mean that the child and they have the same last name as me doesn't mean that they have to model every single thing that I do. And
Yes.
they have a life to live, and I'm there to guide them in a certain way. And the example that I talk about, and I remember my mom hearing it for the first time when I said it as an example. I might have even said it here on the podcast. Is the role of a parent is
Mhm.
to give these tiny little, let's call them jewelry boxes of
Mhm.
tidbits throughout
Mm.
throughout a kid's childhood, and
Mhm.
they're collecting hundreds and hundreds of these little jewelry boxes. And every
Mm.
single time something happens, whether it's how to bake a certain type of cookie, how to fold a present, how to fold a shirt,
Mhm.
they're putting all these little things inside these jewelry boxes and they put it in their room. And then as they get older, there's this thing that they realize called independence, called
Mhm.
autonomy, that they're learning about, that they're trying to see what that actually is, and they're becoming curious about it. And all of a sudden, there's this front door that they're like, "Hey, I can walk out of this thing," and
Mhm.
they're like, "Oh, okay." And like, wait, before I leave, I have to take something with me. So they open up this big garbage bag and they start putting in all of those little jewelry boxes. And then they
Mhm.
try walking out the front door, but then they realize, oh my God, I cannot get out this front door. This
Mm.
bag is too big. So the role of the parent is to stand by the front door. And as the
Mm.
child opens up that bag, they're going to hand the parent little jewelry boxes
Mm.
until they can finally walk out of the door. And then they're going to walk a few steps. Then they're going to realize, this bag is too heavy. I can't walk out of
Mhm.
here. What are they going to do? They're going to open up the bag. Parents going to still be by the door. And the
Mhm.
child is going to be putting some stuff back into the hands of the parents. And then
Mm.
the child's gonna get a little further. It's gonna get a little heavier still because they can't walk that
Mhm.
far with it carrying that much. Sooner or later, they're gonna start realizing, you know what? Maybe I just need a little carry-on. that has wheels on it, and I could put certain things inside of it, and the rest of it I can keep here. The role of the
Mhm.
parent is to stay by the door at all times and
Mhm.
know that child might come back and take certain things. I don't care if the parent's gonna be 40, 50, 60, or 90. And
Mhm.
sometimes some things are always gonna be staying in that house because they're special for that house. And
Mhm.
the child has to feel that, you know what? That house was always a place that I could go back to go get that one box of how to wrap
Yes.
presents, how to go make that cookie, or how to do certain things in different types of situations where it's a little more tight or stressful financially
Mhm.
or emotionally or mentally, whatever it is. And I learned certain things there, and therefore I could go back and get it. And there's a certain
Mhm.
fond feeling that some of us have, and maybe even uncomfortable feelings that we have from a house that we might want to keep in that house as well. And that's okay.
Mhm.
And as long as we're able to have that balance, but the role of the parent doesn't change. As their autonomy is coming about, as we're going to a
Mhm.
place of being able to hopefully give our kids the tools that they need. They're gonna take those little boxes with them, and then the ones that they don't need,
Mhm.
they're gonna come back and put here. They're not gonna throw it on the street. They're not gonna litter
Mhm.
because there's a certain connection that they have to the house that they came from, and hopefully that's something that they're able to go ahead and take with them for as long as possible. And they're gonna come back to the house for holidays. They're gonna remember certain things, like, "Oh, you know what? Maybe this
Mhm.
time I'm gonna take this with me because, I'm about to have a little newborn at home, and I remember how
Yeah.
mom took care of the newborn when I was 6, and I watched them take care of that little baby girl, my sister, and I remember that
Mhm.
was really cool how she did certain things. Let me
Mhm.
take that back. She didn't need that as a 14-year-old, but now that she's 34 years old and she has a baby of her own, she's gonna come back and
Mhm.
take that. Our role as parents, stay by the door,
I
and
love that.
I think it's such an important thing.
And I think that's so fascinating because I think as a parent, and my oldest goes off to college next year, so I'm very much in this sort of like learning to stand by the door instead of hold their hand so tightly. Um, there's a lot of sadness in the things that are left behind, but I love both the idea that they can come back and pick those up anytime, but also I think when we focus on that sadness, we miss the opportunity that they're creating new jewelry, new jewelry boxes out there in the world, and it's things that I never could have come up with on my own. I never could have imagined, but somehow I did give them the tools and the resources and the life experiences that enabled them to do this, and
Ah,
what a privilege to sit there
yeah.
and watch this in the world. And how can we get our grandparents and our parents are excited about figuring out who they are in the world now, what it means to be a teenager in 2025, and instead of trying to fit it into a frame of what it meant in 1975.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. And okay, I like what you're talking about, the 2025 to 1975, because I think another big thing that I think about constantly is technology and how much
Oh.
that's changed.
Mhm.
From 8 tracks and having to
Mhm.
use a pencil in order to make sure the tape
Mhm.
was still working properly, to blowing into things in order so that that games actually work
The
properly, to being
cheat
in a place
codes on
now.
the
Right.
games.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Today it's just being grandma, you just have to press this button and you can listen to the
Mhm.
entire album.
Mhm.
Things change in a certain way, which I think could create a certain sense of relatability to that previous
Mhm.
generation. But at the same time, I think sometimes there's a negativity. Like in my day, this is how we used to go about fun, which
Mhm.
I think can have a little negative connotation to it when it comes to how the previous generation might be communicating with the new generation. And I'm curious, as a
Mhm.
parent, what's our role? How do we make sure that there's a very healthy bridge when it comes to that old technology or whatever
Yeah.
it was, whether it was
Mhm.
wooden blocks, as opposed to today where there's so many new things, and we want to be able to have a healthy balance with it. How would you talk to parents? So what would be a role that you would say parents need to play to make sure that there's a healthy bridge with technology, with that grandparent generation to today?
Yeah. I think you can be the whisperer in the ear of both the grandparent and the grandchild. To the grandparent, you can say things like, "Hey, use my kid as your tutor. Ask them to show you how to use YouTube. Tell them you've been wanting to look for some chair yoga exercises and could they help you find it
Mm,
in YouTube?" Like, give them a job they could do with you. Because I think the doing of it helps break down the barriers. I have a friend whose mother, who's, in her 70s, had her 13-year-old granddaughter show her favorite videos on TikTok. And for an hour, they just sat there and watched videos together on an iPad, and that was a real bonding experience. So suggest that idea to your parents, and let your parents or your grandparents know Yeah, there's some challenges with technology, but it also gives you this way of communicating that is
Yeah.
an accessibility you never had before. And it's totally in bounds to text your grandson and say, "Hey, I heard you had a game today. Send me a picture afterwards or let me know what the score was." That's totally fine. Text and reach out. Use it as a way to start conversations. So that's the pre-work you can do with your parents. And with your own kids, you can do the same, have the same sort of encouragement. Like, "Kid, it's hard. I know it's awkward sometimes to talk to grandma on the phone, so text her instead." You know? It's okay. You can control the conversation, the pacing, and timing of it a little more. So let's use this as an open channel instead of an obstacle.
I love that. The open channel instead of an obstacle. And I think that as you're talking about that, I'm thinking about like my own 13-year-old who just got a cell phone, his first cell phone for the first
Big
time.
deal.
And that's something that I know he's so excited about. I was so reluctant as a therapist, primarily working with communication between parents and teenagers, and
Mhm.
knowing social media and knowing technology as much as I have had experience with it as a therapist and obviously personally as well. But I think the
Mhm.
concept of communication through technology could be taboo in some ways, scary in some
Mhm.
ways, intimidating. There are so many different things that come about to it, but using it in like a positive way, like you're talking about, I think
Mhm.
is you make it relatable. You make it something that there's a common ground, which is what we're trying to do when it
Yes.
comes to that previous generation. I know my son loves calling his grandparents who live on the West Coast, and he
Okay,
could
cool.
give them a detail of his day from period to period, and what he did here and there. And he found someone that would love to hear every single little
Mhm.
detail, which is awesome. And getting in a pair of AirPods, and he could just walk around the house and just say, "Oh, and then we did this from 1:45
Mhm.
to 1:52, and then 1:52 we did this," and it's just like, you know what? Thank God he found someone that he's able to that wants to hear him for
Mhm.
an half hour every single day, go through every single detail, which is what we're trying to do is to
Yeah.
bring that communication, which is so important because technology, yes, there are many dangers out there, and this is not a podcast to be talking about that, but right now we're looking at the positive. And
Mhm.
I think, something that I talk a lot about is, and I got this from a mentor of mine, is we wanna harbor situations where it's, "I can't wait to tell my parents," as opposed to,
Mhm.
"Ooh, I can't wait, my parents cannot find out about this." And that's what we're
Yeah.
trying to create. And I think when we have that within the home, and then you have
Mhm.
another generation you bring in as well, and there's a wealth of amazingness that comes with that.
Mhm.
Create that as well with our kids. Create those moments. And the same way our kids might look at going on some trip where there's no Wi-Fi, like, "Oh my god, this made the boringest thing ever." But we did it, and some
Mhm.
great memories. Okay, so how can grandparents come in and help with that? Because they grew up in a world where if our kids went back in time and they saw what our parents, with their grandparents, what they did
Mhm.
for us on a summer day without any camp or technology, they think they have the worst life in the world. But if they look at it, like, actually, no, it looks like a lot of fun because they did certain
Mhm.
things. How can we bring that in? How can we bridge that gap? And I think it's really, really important. I think
Yeah.
something else that really comes up over here is, I think we started talking about this before. Sometimes because there's a bridge is usually on an arc, and there's
Mhm.
usually a sense of this side to this side, which passing over something, and the thing that's usually
Mhm.
passing over is the common ground in between, which is the parent. And
Mhm.
there could also sometimes be tension when it comes to the grandparents and their child, and that can also get in the way when it comes
Mm.
to the next generation because I might be like, or a parent might be like, I know what my 11 through 15-year-old self was like at home. It was so awkward and so
Mhm.
hard. I want to make sure that my parents stay far away from my child in that sense.
Mhm.
And I think there's a certain, I guess you could say, protector that comes about as a parent, probably from a good
Mhm.
place in a certain way,
Mhm.
when it
Mhm.
comes to being able to make sure that there's no communication because that might be better than the bad communication. What can a parent do, or what is our role to make sure that the bridge the gap doesn't skip over in that sense, but
Mhm.
yet we're still able to have a communication between those two generations, even though we didn't have a good relationship. We might not have had a good relationship with our parents, but yet there
Mhm.
still should be some intergenerational connection that could be amazing that we might be
Yeah.
missing out on.
Yeah. It's a fabulous question, and before I address it, I do wanna acknowledge that some of us really did have traumatic experiences with our family, and it may mean that our kids are not safe with a grandparent. And if that's the case, then this advice does not apply to you. I
Thank you for saying that. Yes,
keep your kids safe.
100%.
And just in the same way that, I was saying, let's teach our kids to ask questions and have these kind of dialogues. But if your child is on the spectrum, we may need to have a different set of expectations. And so I hope parents can connect the dots to their own experience and adapt. But let's assume that you have just a typical rocky family relationship with your parents instead of a truly troubling relationship with them. Um, and you are concerned about, how do I make sure that sort of the venom that I absorbed as a kid doesn't get passed to my own children? And at the same time, I still want there to be a relationship there. I actually maybe hope that I can improve my relationship with my parents, and that my kids can be a bit of common ground between me and my mom, me and my dad, whatever it is. I put less expectation in that moment on dialogue and more expectation on doing, would be my
Mm,
advice. Look for opportunities to do things together as a family. Go to the baseball game together, bake cookies instead of sit down for a conversation, play dominoes, walk the dog, go on a family vacation that's very activity oriented instead of sitting around and having long conversations around a fireplace oriented. Whatever it is, give opportunities for doing together instead of putting the pressure on dialogue. And then, of course, as a parent, have those post conversation debriefs with your kids to say, I could tell that grandma's worldview sort of says this. We've sort of raised you this way. What do you think? Allow your kids to have their own opinion and make their opinion safe in that post conversation debrief.
yeah, I'm so glad you said that. First of all, the way you started off, and I think we could probably have a whole separate conversation just on the traumatic experiences that we might have had and how that might
Mhm.
come to play into the child rearing that we wanna have, but yet also wanna have a relationship, and that's for sure something that if there are specific events or certain things that happen, and unfortunately, there are situations where parents don't have
Yeah.
any communication with their own parent, therefore, there's not gonna be a grandparent involved,
Mhm.
if there's gonna be safety issues, that's 100% something that, has to be taken into consideration. And I think it can be very hard, and we have to put aside our ego when it comes to, you know, because they treated me a certain way, therefore I'm gonna treat them a certain way.
Mhm.
Might be an instinct that that some people might have because I wanna make sure that I'm in control over here because they controlled me, and that comes into play a lot.
Yeah, and but when you, as an adult, when you respond to your own parents that way and your kids witness it, you are inadvertently teaching them how to treat you when they're an adult. There's lots of pronouns there. I hope that that wasn't confusing. But what I'm saying is, we should model for our children the way we want to be treated when we are in our 60s and our 70s, when we are the grandparent. And
100%.
yeah.
And I think that's really important because that's gonna mean that might have to put certain things aside. We have to
Mhm.
suck it up in a certain way and say, "You
Mhm.
know what? I know certain things happened, and the way we go when I was treated, was not something that I approve of in any way, but you know what? I gotta put that aside because there is something that's
Mhm.
really, really valuable, and we're fortunate." Growing up, I knowing only 2 of my grandparents, unfortunately.
Mm.
I would have loved to have met my other 2 grandparents, and I never did. And
Mhm.
and to see nowadays a lot of kids having multiple grandparents and great-grandparents, and I think
Mhm.
it's such a fortunate thing that we can have that intergenerational relationships, and if we're gonna not be able to put aside or deal with, and if you have to go speak to someone, whether it's your spouse or someone professionally to make sure that those things are you're not hiding from them, but you're able to
Yeah.
sort of process them out in a way
Mhm.
where I could move those things aside, not water under the bridge. I think it's
No.
important to say, "No, not getting rid of it," because it's still there, and it's
Mhm.
something that needs to be acknowledged and recognized. And we're also putting it aside enough to say, well, this relationship is more valuable because there's
Mhm.
so much that could be gotten out of there. And I think there are so many people that that I've talked to both from this podcast and in general in life and friends that they have such fond memories. I mean, right beyond my camera is a picture of me and my grandfather, and I think so
Mm.
many people have that of that relationship that cannot be explained in
Mhm.
words and is so different than a relationship with a parent. And being someone that's been so fortunate to have a good relationship with my parents, does compare
Mhm.
to my grandfather, and, he hasn't been alive in over 10 years, and it's
Mhm.
still something that I hold so dear to me, that my kids talk about him. My kids never really my oldest, she was a baby, but, it was not something that, they ever had a chance to know my relationship with
Mhm.
him, but yet it's still one of the most valuable relationships I've ever had in my life,
Yeah.
and because I might have some demons in the closet, therefore, I'm gonna uh, have my kids not have the same experience with their grandfather.
Mhm.
That wouldn't be
Yeah.
fair, and
Yeah.
I'm putting my kids at a loss. I'm giving them a disadvantage in life, and the
Mhm.
value of having other relationships. And then how is that going to affect other relationships that they might have later on in life as well? Because they
Mhm.
don't see a value in a elderly relationship, which can be so valuable and so important. My
Yeah.
wife comes from a home where she got to have her both her grandparents for years, and
Mhm.
for my kids to get to know her grandparents, so they have great grandparents, and well, when they passed on, it was very sad for them, and I remember having to pick up one of my kids from school early because they were in such a bad place.
Mm.
I think it's such a valuable thing for my kids to have, that they know people
Yeah.
that were 80 years older than them, and to be able
Yes.
to have that relationship, I think it goes so far. And if we're not going to be able to put those things aside, our qualms that we might have, that can be really hard, and it can be really
Yeah.
difficult when it comes to their own child rearing that they're gonna have.
Mhm.
So
I
I'm
think
so happy you brought that up.
yeah, I think we've hinted at something multiple times throughout this conversation that I just wanna name, which is that we can treat with dignity and we can treat imperfect people with dignity.
Hmm.
We can give respect to people who have not always been as great at showing it as we want it to be. And
Yeah.
that's has to be based in our own character. Sometimes it's harder work than than it is in other cases. Often it's something like, grandpa gets a little distracted by the baseball game and doesn't pay attention to me. Well, that's an imperfection too, but we still treat with respect. But I want my children, I want myself to be people that treat all others with dignity, even though and without the expectation of people being perfect, acknowledging imperfection and still valuing the individual.
For sure, and I think that this goes into a lot of the work that you do, which I would like, I'm glad you bring it up this way when it comes to the leadership role in parenting,
Mhm.
and how
Mhm.
we go about being able to a leader doesn't mean that you're perfect. A leader doesn't mean that
No.
everything is going to be batting 1,000, because there's going to be ups and downs. And I think as a parent, probably, I think it's fair to say the most important leadership role that we might ever have, no matter how big your company is ever going
Mhm.
to be. There are certain lessons that need to be taught, and one of them is, to be able to respect and love that person, even though right now they might be concentrating a little too much on the TV and it's Sunday afternoon and
Mhm.
during playoff time, and even though we're here for the first time in months, and they might be doing that, and
Mhm.
that's okay, but it doesn't change the fact that you still love that person, you still respect the person, you want to spend time with them,
Mhm.
and to be able to push aside the actions as opposed to the person. What would be some things that we can be able to share and give over to our kids in that way of valuing what they have, but also pushing aside those actions that might not be the best thing for them to model?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, at where I do as professionally, I'm a leadership consultant and coach. And one of the core principles that we often talk about when you're experiencing tension or conflict at work is to focus on the problem, not the person. So make it about the problem. Don't make it about the person. So in this example we've been using of grandpa's really focused on the playoff game instead of on their grandkid who'd really love their attention, you don't turn to your dad and say, "You are so disrespectful and you're ignoring the kid that's in front of you that's desperate because you're selfish." That would be making it about the person. You make it about the problem. "Hey, dad, I know this game's really important to you. Do you think we could, I don't know, record it so that you could be with your kid who wants your attention now and probably will be on to something else in 5 minutes? Or at the 7th inning stretch, could we go outside and play a little pitch and catch ourselves?" Um, so you make it about the problem, not about the person. I think that's one of the best things we can do in challenges, not because the person doesn't need work, but because we all get defensive. And the more we can help us address clear problems, the more we become better people in the process.
So it helps us stay focused, which I
Mhm.
think is really important. I know that's something again we do I talk a lot about it in my practice is when we have a relationship and especially with a child to have
Mhm.
certain things that we focus on that how are we staying on task with this parental
Mhm.
child relationship? So let's pick every Tuesday night we go to ice cream, and
Mhm.
that's something that we do no matter what. So it could be you
Mhm.
just came home and you got a really bad report card being, hey, it's 8 o'clock, it's Tuesday, let's go. It's time to do this
Mhm.
because it's focusing on the relationship and not on that specific issue. Now, that doesn't mean
Mhm.
that there might not be things we have to work on and might have to
Mhm.
be earlier curfews, less time on technology or the internet,
Mhm.
and right now it's 8 o'clock and it's Tuesday, and we're still doing this.
Mhm.
This is what we do. I'm
Uh-huh.
curious how a principle like that can be used within that grandparent role, and how is that
Mm.
something that we can try to bring in a way where it's not telling our parents, like, "Hey, you should be doing this," but at the same time, it's
Mhm.
also putting them into that place to say, "Hey, is there something that you can do that can be more common ground-ish with our child as
Mhm.
opposed to being something that creates division?"
Yeah. I mean, I think looking for those common ground opportunities is fabulous. For the last 4 summers, my daughter has gone to my mom's house because for a week because they both love to crochet and knit, and they just watch HGTV and crochet for a week. Um, I can't imagine doing that. I don't have the skill, but, they have created this excuse me, they'd created this habit or this hobby together that gives them a routine and a way to be together outside of dialogue and conversation. And so I love your suggestion of this is a tradition, this is an experience. And holidays are another great example. A lot of families, either around their faith traditions or around just their cultural traditions, will have hobbies or have traditions that they can bring into it. And getting kids involved in that across generations and do starting that from in utero, starting very early to build those and allowing them to adapt as both the parents age and maybe don't have the mobility or the capacity, and as the kids age and their interests, their willingness shifts as well.
Yeah.
I think that's a
I
fabulous
think
idea.
that's a really good point. I'm glad you I don't know why I didn't say it that way, but regarding tradition and creating
Mhm.
tradition obviously something that is intergenerational and something that,
Mhm.
we grew up with, and we do certain things at certain times of the year, and
Mhm.
whether it's religious or whether it's just familial, it's fine. It doesn't
Yeah.
make a difference because it's creating a certain connection, and,
Mhm.
anyone that is not living under a rock and has seen any sort of advertisements, they can see, different generations
Mhm.
baking cookies, setting the table, going to stores and buying certain items that we have on the table
Mhm.
or in the house. I think that goes so far that to create the thing, and it could be as simple as, "Hey, I know your first day off of school is gonna be December 16th, so I'm gonna wait until then, until to do the
Mhm.
shopping to get the stuff for the house because I know that's something that we do every year.
We do
Or
every
you
year.
know what? You're gonna
Mhm.
go to grandma and grandpa's house a couple days early to help them set up, whether it's the foods that they need or the stuff that the house, the way we usually have it set up, that's gonna be something that
Mhm.
you're gonna start doing with them because now that's tradition."
Oh,
And that's what we're
yeah.
talking about. It's creating those things that, yes, they can be completely different when it comes to their
Mhm.
values, their morals, and
Mhm.
their views when it comes to when it comes to politics or just how to
Mhm.
dress. But
Mhm.
this is the way we do things in the house. This is the way we bake cookies, and this is the way we do things, and let's do it together because that it's about that togetherness. And as long as we're harboring and bringing that togetherness and creating that tradition, which there's no better time to create new tradition than now, and there's no reason why
Mhm.
that's something that can't be changed to fit 2025 instead of it being
Mhm.
2001. And
Yeah.
it doesn't change things in that sense, and I think that's what we're trying to do constantly, and I'm so happy that we're talking about this because as someone that has very fond memories of grandparents and someone that I will
Mhm.
hopefully, be able to be in that position one day as well, as tradition is something that is so, so important. At the same
Mhm.
time, I think sometimes there could be a lot of resistance, especially
Oh,
from the
yeah.
younger generation that wants to do things their own way, and anyone that's a
Mhm.
parent knows exactly what I'm talking about.
Mhm.
I'm curious, how is that something that we can try to give over in a beautiful, healthy, loving way and
Mhm.
creating those things that we want to pass down, even though there's that certain, no, I'm too cool for that. And, not wanting to do that. What would be something as, coming from that leadership
Yeah.
role that we are as parents can make sure that our kids are doing that?
Well, I immediately, as you said that, thought of your jewelry box analogy or from earlier that you've gotta decide, is this a jewelry box that I'm going to insist you carry while you're in my household? Or is this one that I can let go of? Because, it's more important to me that you keep this than that, and I'm gonna I hate the expression, but pick my battles and ask for this and not that. Um, I mean, I think parenting often involves negotiation, just as the workplace does, and, we have to know what is just absolutely most vital to us, and then we have to express it to our kids, and I one of the things I think we're raising children, all of our kids are in schools and they've had all these AP classes and they're very smart and they know how to put together these logical arguments. And so they expect there always to be logic. Clear, undeniable, I can explain this with logic. And I think life is a lot about experience and about felt meaning and about things you can know without logic. And so one of the things you can also say to your kids is, hey, I know it doesn't make a lot of sense that we do this silly tradition around X holiday or around X faith aspect of our faith or whatever it is. But some things you know from experience instead of knowing from logic. For me, this has been a thing I know from experience. I'm asking you to hang with it and do with it as a family, as a cultural experience, as a member of our family, as I'm requesting of this of you do it because you love me, even if you don't love it yourself. Come do it for experience, even if it's not for logic. And I'll make it as non-miserable as possible. We'll go out for ice cream after the first hour, you can escape to the back bedroom with your cell phone, whatever it is.
Right.
Um, adapt as you can too.
Yeah, I very well said, and I think just to add one little thing to that is, I would even ask the child as well of, how would you want to add your own little
Oh.
ingredient to this?
Mhm.
Is there a way that you wanna bake the cookie or maybe do something a little bit different, add something to
Mhm.
this? Because I think when there's a part of me that's in that thing that we're doing, that's like, "Oh,
Mhm.
I was a part of that," and that's something that we did, and
Mhm.
it creates that we that that brings that bond, which I think is really, really important. I mean, this topic that we're talking about, we could probably continue going on. I have probably another
Absolutely.
15, 20 questions that we can sort of talk about this, and especially bringing in that like leadership role over here.
Mhm.
As we're like, running out of time over here, I'm curious to hear from you and your experiences that you've had, and what would be something you would say that you've been able to bring from your relationship that you had with your grandma, and something that
Mhm.
you've been able to now bring into the next generation, and hopefully that could something that will continue to future generations.
I was so lucky with my grandma because she grew up in a small town. She lives in a town of 99 people. And except for 1 year that she spent living on a military base with my grandfather, she has never lived anywhere else. Uh, and so you would think her world would be small, but instead she was so curious about the world. And she, as a kid, she would read it to us from the encyclopedia. If tamales were like new to us in our community, and she made sure I tried tamales, and she made sure I tried lobsters, and she made sure I'd ridden a train. And she opened the world up to me in ways that I would never have accessed on my own living in a similarly small community. And I think it's shaped who I am as an adult. And I don't know that my kids I think it would be unlikely that my kids would get who are being raised in Chicago would get that same sort of experience with her today or with their own grandparents. But what I think they can get is this is a different way of living, a different way of being, and there's some value in it. It's knitting together, literally with my mom, it's knitting together. So look at those aspects of life, the different view on life that your grandparent brings to you. Learn to be curious about it. You said that word earlier, and it's such a good one. Learn to come at it as a sociologist, as an
Mm,
experiment with it, to accept the feeling of it, even if you can't accept the logic of it, or if it doesn't fit you well, accept that it fits them and see how it expands your world over time.
I love that. I love that. Very, very well said. And there were so many things going through my head regarding my own experiences, and also seeing even in my own parents how my kids can sort of connect to them in
Mm.
some ways, and create their own little bridges, in the sense that,
Mhm.
"Oh, this is something that, I do with grandpa, and this is my
Mhm.
thing," which is what we're trying to do, and I think something that's a never-ending job, just like parenting.
Mhm.
And we touched on so many different things today, and I know we're sort of running out of time over here, but I'm curious, based on this topic, from bridging the gap and creating a
Mhm.
intergenerational harmonious home in so many different levels. Are there certain things, or are there any questions or certain topics that we didn't talk about that you feel like could be a really good add-on, to this
Yeah.
awesome conversation?
Goodness, I mean, I think we could spend an hour just talking on how do you have real good conversation. My passion in life is teaching people how to ask good questions, and so we could spend a lot of time talking about that. I am a big fan of the idea that it's always okay to answer the question you wanted to be asked instead of the question
Mm.
you were asked. Um, and so an example of that would be your grandparent says, "Hey, are you getting good grades?" And you don't really wanna confess to them that, "No, you are not," as an 11-year-old getting great grades. Then you can take a page from the politician's playbook and answer the question that you wanted to be asked, which is about your sports team or about the collage you're building in art class. And most of the time, people don't even notice that you've shifted the conversation on them. But it helps you find the place that you're willing to talk about. And so that's a tip I love to give to people, to adults and to children alike, is learn to and especially with the people that really matter to you. We don't always get the question we need, but if you know the question you need, answer the question you wanted to be asked.
Hmm, okay, so if you don't could you say that last line one more time?
Yeah. If you don't get the question you need, answer the question you wanna be asked.
Hmm,
And,
okay, that's very
maybe if I give
insightful.
a non-parenting example, it would help. A year and a half ago, we lost my brother. He was 42 years old, and he died of cancer, and it was really hard. It's still really hard. And my friends who loved me very much and who were doing lots of things like bringing flowers and bringing meals and driving people around, they would ask me, "How are you doing?" And the answer to that varied from moment to moment, but it wasn't good. I never quite knew how to answer that. The question I wanted to be asked was, "Tell me about your brother."
Hmm,
I was thinking of all these stories about growing up. I was thinking
sure.
about all the things I'd respected about him, the things I'd learned from his friends as they came to his hospital room, and I wanted to talk about that with people. And I finally learned that when somebody who really cared about me asked, "How are you doing?" that I could just say, "I'm okay." It's been going through my mind is and then I could launch into a story about Logan, and they were there for it. They were there to hear it.
Oof.
Now that's a very serious circumstance, and it took me being aware of what I really needed and saying it. And it also took somebody I knew cared and would go with me whatever handle I gave them in the conversation. We don't always have that, both the self-awareness or the willingness of the other person to come along for the ride. But even in much less serious topics, like what's your favorite subject at school, you can answer the question that you wanted to be asked, which is,
Hmm.
"Let's talk instead about the band that I'm in."
Yeah, I thank you for the example, and it resonated with me personally as well. I think that's something that, when we know the right intentions of the person asking the questions, which in a lot of cases, especially if we're having a holiday with the grandparents, usually it's on the better side. And if
Yeah.
they're asking something about school, like, well, I'm doing really well in this subject because I also have a teacher that I love and I know loves
Yes.
me.
Mhm.
So there's that could be taught to a child. I think
Mhm.
is a phenomenal example in that sense. And I think it goes so far to be able to talk about it in that in a way where we're able to go ahead and give over what it is that we thought we wanted the question to be, in that
Yeah.
sense. And I always said, at least, for the sake of having a company and having private practice, if I ever had a T-shirt that I'd be selling for CUA therapy would be,
Mhm.
"How are you, comma, really?" Because that's what your good friends are really asking, and they're giving you the
Mhm.
door. Now, sometimes we would like the door to be a little more specific, but it's not
Mhm.
always gonna happen, and people are trying to be respectful as well. And I think when it comes to grandparents, that's for sure something that, they wanna know more about their grandkids, and not just because they have
Mhm.
a common enemy, but, there's something really special when they get to see the next generation, and it's a blessing, and, not
Yeah.
everyone gets a chance to see that, experience it, and then to have conversation with it as well. It's
Yes.
really, really amazing. So this has been so amazing in so many different ways to be able to talk about it, and I know I need to process that, so many things that we talked about over here.
Mm.
I'm curious to hear from you. Well, you were talking about, some things that you do. Where can people find you, and how can people get in touch with you?
Yeah, absolutely. I have a Substack newsletter. It's free. It's called Better Than Fine. To go back to your just comment that, we how are you? Fine is our answer. And so how do we get out of these scripted conversations? Stop just communicating, then truly connect. And the newsletter is designed to help you be a better leader, partner, and parent in 5 minutes a week by asking better questions, being a better communicator. So I'd love for people to come join me over there at Substack.
Amazing. Okay, so we will post a link in the show notes over here. Any place on social media, any other website where people can get a hold of you?
Beyond that, I'm mostly a LinkedIn user and also on Instagram, and I'll get the links to you as well.
Awesome. Okay. As we like to finish off over here, some rapid fire questions. I'm curious, based on our topic of conversation, and
Mhm.
without any self promoting, are there any books or podcasts that you would recommend
Yeah.
people can listen to?
Yeah. One of my favorite recent books is Super Communicators by Charles Duhigg. He's a fabulous journalist, a brilliant mind, and he references in that book almost all of the research studies and the science that I draw on to inform my leadership and communications practice. And it's just a brilliant book about how to be a real good communicator in your life. And that involves
Awesome.
active listening, it involves the way you ask questions, the way you share information. It's really useful.
Yeah, okay, that sounds like something that I would love to get, but I'm on
Mhm.
a freeze of buying books right now because that pile is getting really big next to my bed, but,
Public
um,
libraries are amazing things.
yes, that is true. I'm a sucker for just buying books, so I know it's something I need to work on. I'm curious to hear from you, Amber, if there would be someone in history that is not alive
Mm.
today, that is also not a relative, that you would like to have
Mhm.
brunch with, who would that be?
Mhm. I Oof, that's a hard question, and, I'm going to go with an unusual answer. I feel it in myself that it's unusual even as I name it, but, um, there's a character in the New Testament named Mary Magdalene, and she plays a pivotal role in Scripture, and it's an unusual position for a woman to be in from that historical time period as well. She holds the fate of the church in her hands briefly, and, I named my daughter Magdalene, um,
Oh,
and I would just love to say, "Did you know what you held in your hands? Did you know, um, what an unusual place in history that was?"
wow, that sounds amazing, yeah, it's an unusual answer for sure, one we haven't gotten here on the podcast, but hopefully,
I
that
don't
would
think
be
I would have
very
predicted
cool.
I would say that, but that was the first good answer I had. Feel free to
That's
add.
awesome. That's great. Well, my last question for you today, Amber, would be if you can think of an everyday mundane superpower that you would like to have as a
Mm.
mom, what would that be?
What I really want is to be able to, like, snap my fingers and have the house be vacuumed. I just
Yes.
want
Yeah.
suck up all the hair and the dust and
Oh.
that lingers. That is so mundane, but honestly, I spend a lot of time thinking, "I should vacuum. I should vacuum." I don't actually spend a lot of time vacuuming, I just spend a lot of time thinking I should.
Thinking
It'd be
about it.
nice not to.
Awesome. That makes perfect sense. Well, Amber, this has been absolute pleasure, and I thank you so, so much for your time today.
Thank you, it was great talking with you.